Good Sunday morning, Northeast Ohio, as we continue our efforts to hunker down. We have a new date set in place for the completion of the March 17th Ohio primary. It is no longer June 2nd, but rather April 28th, and it will be primarily a vote-by-mail election with the onus on you to request your ballot. The legislature this week making the move. There will be limited opportunities for in-person voting that day, April 28th, but only for those with disabilities who require in-person voting and those who simply don't have a home address. And it will not be at your polling locations, only at boards of elections and early vote centers. Well, for the first time since this coronavirus crisis started, we're getting a glimpse at what voters are thinking, not only here in Ohio, but across the Great Lakes region as part of a new Baldwin-Wallace poll. The Baldwin-Wallace Great Lakes poll surveyed voters in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The results showed the president closing the gap against his yet-to-be-named Democratic opponent in 3 of the 4 states since January, Michigan the exception. While in Ohio, we went from 5 points down to 1.5 points up. The poll was taken between March 17th and the 25th as the coronavirus crisis was escalating.
Despite some of the early issues with whether he took it seriously or not, the bottom line is that as this data was being collected over the last week, people basically are giving him pretty decent marks, both in terms of his overall approval in the head-to-head against a Democrat, and even in how he's been handling the coronavirus crisis.
Yes, while the president's overall approval rating is at 51% in Ohio, it's at 58% when it comes to how Ohioans view his handling of the crisis. A strong number, but pale in comparison to the nearly 80% support for what Governor Mike DeWine has done.
As an anecdote, a friend of mine sent me information about something she'd gotten from a friend who's in China right now, who referred to a map and called it the United States of Ohio. That's the kind of attention that we're getting as a state in the response to this coronavirus crisis.
In Ohio, 76% of those surveyed said they were concerned about COVID-19, while nearly 69% of them worried that they or someone in their families could catch it. When it comes to the concerns of Ohioans in the presidential election, there are 2 that outpace all others, both tied to the current state of affairs, the economy and health care, with the latter likely to assume the top position.
I think the economy is high. It's going to just increase, I think, in concern for people as we see people themselves or their neighbors, friends, family who are losing jobs as a result of this crisis.
And as a sign of the extent of the praise for Governor DeWine, consider what Democrat Senator Sherrod Brown told me this week.
No secret, I never voted for DeWine. I'm sure he's never voted for me. But I admire his leadership, and I told him, and I talked to him regularly. And I've told him a number of times I wish that the president had been 1/10 as good as he has been. I never expect him to respond to that, and he just smiles.
Well, both Brown and Senator Portman voting on that massive $2.2 trillion stimulus package this week that includes money for you and money for state and local governments. In the meantime, the state of Ohio is sitting on $2.7 billion they got stuffed away in a mattress for just this type of emergency. Most of us try, not always successfully, to stash away spare change here and there for an emergency. The state of Ohio is no different, only their sock drawer is called the Ohio Budget Stabilization Fund, or as we know it, the Rainy Day Fund. And over the years, Ohio has had its share of rain, forcing a newly elected Governor George Voinovich in 1991 to drain the fund before later building it back up. So did his successors Bob Taft and Ted Strickland, who famously left the fund in 2010 with under $1 during the Great Recession, a move that would haunt his future political life.
But as governor, Ted Strickland left only 89 cents in Ohio's Rainy Day Fund.
It was Governor John Kasich who took the fund from that 89 cents gradually up to just under $2.7 billion, where it stands today, consistently fighting legislative efforts to rate it. To put it in household terms, that $2.7 billion to the state is the equivalent of a person earning $50,000 a year having $3,900 stashed away for an emergency. It's enough to cover expenses for about 4 weeks. It's something DeWine told me shortly after winning election he would work to protect. The state has a rainy day fund of $3 billion. Sounds like a lot, but in a $70 billion budget, that can be gone on a blip. In what case would you ever tap into that?
Well, I think a rainy day fund is there when we hit a recession, when we hit a pretty significant bump in the road. And the whole idea is so that we can get through that without dramatically slashing services.
But by that definition, DeWine today will tell you
it's raining. But look, this is the type crisis that Governor Kosich and the legislature intended when they started putting this money away.
And DeWine, for his part, doesn't want to repeat the mistakes made in the past where you released the money without making cuts elsewhere in the budget so you can make the impact of it last longer. Those talks now just beginning in the legislature. With Democracy 2020, I'm John Kosich. Enjoy your Sunday and stay safe.